The giant trading hall was almost empty now. The crowd that had filled the place earlier had started leaving. The air was full of dust and the faint smell of metal and smoke drifted through the room. It was the end of another long day at the Outer Rim auction house, a place where lost things were sold, including those who had no choice. Voices that once shouted bids and numbers had grown silent. Only the sound of footsteps and the echo of chains remained. At the far end of the hall stood a small cage unlike the others. Inside it sat a young alien girl. Her silver-blue skin glowed softly under the dull lights, and her sharp eyes watched everything with quiet anger. Her hair was wild, tangled, and her clothes were torn from rough handling. She didn't cry or beg. She just sat still, her gaze fixed straight ahead as if waiting for something. The traders had started calling her the Wild One, because she refused to obey anyone. The auctioneer, a tall man with a tired voice, cleared his throat and looked at the few people still standing around. "Last one for today," he shouted, trying to sound cheerful. "Strong, healthy, and, well, a bit stubborn, but with the right owner, she'll be useful." His voice echoed in the large hall, but no one moved. People glanced at the cage, whispered among themselves, and turned away. "She's dangerous," one man muttered. "Heard she attacked 2 guards last week." Another woman shook her head. "Not worth it. Can't be trained. Look at her eyes, and too wild." The auctioneer sighed. He lowered the price again and again, but still no hand went up. Even the machines that recorded bids seemed bored. The hall lights flickered, and for a moment everything looked dull and lifeless. The alien girl's name wasn't known to anyone there. To the traders, she was just a number, a leftover item. Her world had been destroyed long ago in the war between humans and her kind. She had survived somehow and ended up here in a cage being sold like a tool, but deep inside her heart a small spark of pride still burned. She didn't speak the human language, but she understood enough to know she was unwanted. Still, she refused to look down. The auctioneer glanced around one last time. "Anyone? Anyone at all?" His voice broke slightly, tired of rejection. Silence filled the room. The last few buyers were already leaving. One of them laughed and said, "Leave her. Nobody wants trouble." Just when the auctioneer was about to end the session, a soft sound of boots echoed from the back of the hall. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, wearing a worn-out soldier's coat with a faded emblem on the arm. His face was calm but carried the marks of long years of war, scars that weren't just on his skin but also deep inside. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. "Captain Ryan Holt," he said, recognizing the man. "Didn't expect to see you here. Looking for work again?" Ryan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the girl in the cage. For a moment he didn't see a wild alien, he saw a memory. During one of the last battles years ago, he had seen a small alien child hiding in the ruins while soldiers marched past. He had tried to help her back then, but the chaos swallowed everything. Now staring at this girl, something inside him stirred. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope. "How much?" Ryan asked quietly. The auctioneer blinked. "You want her?" he asked, almost surprised. "I asked how much," Ryan repeated. His voice was calm but carried weight. The few remaining people stopped and stared. A human soldier buying an alien girl? It didn't make sense. Some snickered, others whispered. The auctioneer shrugged. "Well, she's the last one. You can take her for the base price." Ryan nodded. He walked forward and handed over his payment chip. The machine beeped, confirming the transaction. The sound of the gavel echoed, "Sold." The guards hesitated before unlocking the cage. "Be careful, Captain," one warned. "She bites." Ryan didn't answer. As the gate opened, the girl stepped out slowly. Her movements were sharp, cautious, like an animal ready to defend itself. She stared at Ryan with those strange, bright eyes, half afraid, half curious. Ryan didn't try to touch her. Instead, he placed his coat around her shoulders. The hall was cold, and her thin clothes offered little warmth. She looked down at the coat, then back at him, unsure what to make of his gesture. The auctioneer shook his head. "You'll regret this, Captain. That one's trouble." "Maybe," Ryan said simply, turning away. "But I've seen worse trouble." They walked out together, the sound of chains fading behind them. Outside, the twin suns were setting over the dusty horizon, painting the sky in orange and red. The wind was dry, carrying the scent of sand and faraway smoke. The girl walked a few steps behind Ryan, still silent, still alert. She didn't know who he was or why he had taken her, but something about him felt different. Ryan led her to a small transport ship parked nearby. He opened the ramp and nodded for her to go inside. She hesitated, glancing around as if expecting a trap. When she didn't move, Ryan spoke softly. "It's safe. You don't have to go back there." His tone was gentle, not an order but an invitation. Slowly, the girl stepped inside. The doors closed with a soft hiss. For the first time in a long while, she was not behind bars. As the ship lifted off, the auction house below grew smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of light in the endless desert. The girl sat quietly, clutching the coat around her shoulders. Ryan piloted the ship silently, his thoughts heavy. He didn't know what he would do next or how to explain his actions. He only knew that leaving her there had felt wrong. He looked at her reflection in the glass. She was staring out at the stars, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. He turned his gaze back to the controls. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that this small act, buying a girl everyone had left behind, was going to change both their lives forever. And as the stars stretched before them, two lost souls, one human, one alien, began a journey neither of them could have ever imagined. The small ship flew quietly through the night sky, cutting across a sea of stars. Inside the cabin, silence filled the air. The hum of the engines was the only sound between the two travelers who barely knew each other. Captain Ryan Holt sat at the controls, his eyes fixed on the navigation screen. Beside him, the alien girl sat with her knees pulled close, watching everything like a wary animal trying to understand a new world. Ryan glanced at her from time to time. She looked tired, but her eyes stayed alert, like someone who had learned never to trust easily. The soft blue light from the dashboard touched her silver skin, making her look almost unreal. Ryan didn't know what to say to her. Words felt heavy. How could he explain to her that he hadn't bought her like the others had? That he didn't want a servant or a trophy? He just couldn't leave her behind? After a long silence, Ryan finally spoke. "You're safe here," he said softly. She didn't reply. Her eyes flicked toward him, then back to the stars outside. She didn't understand all his words, but she seemed to sense that his tone wasn't harsh. He reached slowly toward the small pack near his seat and pulled out a food ration. He placed it near her. "Eat," he said, nodding. She hesitated, then reached out, sniffing it carefully before taking a small bite. The taste made her wrinkle her nose, but hunger won over distrust. Ryan smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's not great," he said, "but it'll keep you alive." Hours passed. The stars shifted. Ryan set the ship's course for a quiet outpost at the edge of the system, his home far from the noise of cities and soldiers. He had lived there alone for years after leaving the army. No one would come looking for him there, and maybe no one would come looking for her either. When the ship finally landed, morning light spread across a dry, rocky valley. The outpost was simple: a small house made of metal panels, a few machines, and a communication tower. Ryan stepped out first and looked around. The wind was cold, brushing against the dry sand. "Home," he said quietly, though the word didn't sound happy. The girl followed him out, her eyes scanning the open land. No fences, no guards, no chains. She looked up at the wide sky, blinking at the brightness. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't surrounded by walls. Ryan opened the door and motioned for her to come in. The room was plain but clean. A small table, a heater, and a bed in the corner. He pointed to the bed. "You can sleep there," he said. She looked unsure, then slowly walked to the corner and touched the blanket, testing it as if she couldn't believe it was meant for her. Ryan turned on the heater and set down some water. "I'll be outside," he said, giving her space. As he stepped out, he sighed deeply. What was he doing? Bringing a stranger home, especially one that the government might still be hunting, wasn't a smart choice. But he couldn't forget the look in her eyes, that quiet strength behind all the fear. Later that day, Ryan tried to talk to her again. He pointed to himself. "Ryan," he said slowly, placing a hand on his chest. Then he pointed at her, waiting. She stared for a moment, confused, then whispered something that sounded like Lyra. Her voice was soft but carried a strange melody. "Lyra," Ryan repeated, nodding. She blinked, surprised he had said it correctly. For the first time, a small flicker of trust appeared in her expression. Over the next few days, Ryan tried to make her feel safe. He didn't force her to do anything. He left food where she could see it and spoke to her in a calm voice even when she didn't reply. Sometimes she stayed inside, quiet and still. Sometimes she would walk around the small area, studying the machines or watching the sky. At night, Ryan often sat outside looking at the stars. He thought about his past. The war, the faces he couldn't forget, the orders he wished he had refused. Maybe saving this one girl wouldn't change the world, but it made something inside him feel lighter. One evening, while Ryan was fixing a broken drone, he noticed Lyra watching him closely. She seemed fascinated by the machine. He smiled and handed her a small tool. "Here," he said, showing her how to tighten a loose bolt. At first, she didn't understand, but then she copied his movement carefully. The bolt clicked into place and she looked up at him, proud of herself. "That's it," Ryan said with a grin. "You're a quick learner." From that moment, something shifted. Lyra began to help him with small things, handing him tools, cleaning parts, or pointing out when something was broken. She still didn't speak much, but her silence no longer felt cold. One night, a storm came suddenly. The wind howled and the roof creaked under the pressure. Ryan rushed to secure the panels outside, but one of them broke loose and hit his shoulder. Pain shot through him and he stumbled. Before he could fall, strong hands grabbed him. Lyra was there, helping him stand. She moved quickly, lifting the metal panel as if it weighed nothing. Her strength was far beyond human. Ryan was stunned but said nothing. When they finally got back inside, both of them were soaked and tired. He sat down, rubbing his arm while Lyra stood nearby watching him. "Thank you," he said quietly. She didn't reply but brought him a blanket. For the first time, her actions showed care. Not fear, not duty, but real care. After that night, the distance between them began to fade. She started to copy his small habits. How he folded his jacket, how he tapped his fingers when thinking. Ryan noticed but didn't say anything. He knew she was trying to learn. Days turned into weeks. Lyra began to speak a few words in his language. Simple things like water, food, and safe. Every time she said something new, Ryan smiled and encouraged her. One morning he caught her standing outside facing the sunrise. Her face looked peaceful, her hair blowing softly in the wind. She turned and met his eyes, and for the first time he saw something different there. Not fear, not confusion, but trust. That moment stayed with him. He realized that saving her had saved him too. Inside his heart he felt a small warmth he hadn't known for years. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world could still be kind, even after all the darkness it had seen. And as the sun rose higher over the barren land, the two stood side by side. No longer captor and captive, but two survivors learning how to live again in a quiet corner of the universe. Days turned into weeks at the quiet outpost. The wind that once sounded lonely began to feel like part of their routine. Ryan had started repairing old machines that had been broken for years, and Lyra often sat nearby, watching closely. She was still quiet, but she was no longer the frightened, silent girl from the auction house. There was a softness now in her eyes, though she remained careful, always observing before acting. Ryan had learned not to rush her. He never asked questions about her past, not because he didn't want to know, but because he didn't want to remind her of pain. Instead, he let time do the work. Every small gesture from her, a nod, a look, a word, was progress. One morning, Ryan found her outside near the water tank, trying to fix a loose pipe. The sun had barely risen, and the air was cool. He walked over and watched as she struggled with the wrench. "Here," he said, stepping closer. "You need to twist it the other way." Lyra frowned, looking at the tool, then copied his motion carefully. The pipe tightened, and water began to flow smoothly again. She turned toward him, her expression proud but shy. "Good job," Ryan said with a small smile. "You're getting better every day." Lyra tilted her head slightly, as if she was still learning how to respond to kindness. Then she smiled, just a little. It was the first time Ryan had seen her do that. For a moment, it made him forget the silence of the desert and the weight of his past. In the days that followed, Lyra started to explore more of the outpost. She liked the open sky and often climbed the rocky hills nearby. Sometimes she would sit there for hours watching the horizon, as if waiting for someone who would never come. Ryan would see her from afar but didn't disturb her. He understood what it meant to carry memories that refused to fade. At night, they shared quiet dinners. Ryan tried to teach her new words in his language. He would point to things and name them slowly. "Table," he said, tapping it. "Chair." Then he pointed at himself. Ryan. Lyra watched carefully, then tried to repeat the words. Her accent was strange but beautiful. When she said his name, it came out soft and almost musical. He chuckled. Close enough, he said, and she gave a small laugh in return, a sound he hadn't heard before. But life at the outpost wasn't always peaceful. One evening, a strong storm rolled in again. The sky turned dark, and thunder echoed across the barren land. Ryan hurried to secure the power units outside while Lyra helped gather supplies. The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking the metal walls. A loud crash sounded as one of the solar panels broke free. Ryan ran out to grab it, but the storm's strength was too much. He slipped on the wet sand and hit the ground hard. Before he could stand, a shadow moved through the rain. Lyra rushed out, ignoring the storm's force. With incredible strength, she lifted the heavy panel off him and dragged it back under shelter. Ryan stared at her in disbelief. She was soaked, her silver blue skin glistening under the lightning, and her eyes burned with determination. You shouldn't have come out, he said, coughing slightly. She shook her head, pointing to him, and spoke one of the few words she had learned. Safe. The storm lasted all night. They sat near the heater, drying off in silence. Ryan looked at her as she rested with her knees pulled close. You saved me, he said quietly. Lyra glanced at him, not fully understanding, but she gave a small nod. After that night, their bond grew stronger. Ryan started trusting her more with his work. Together, they repaired machines, planted small crops, and kept the outpost running. Lyra's curiosity grew each day. She learned quickly, watching every move Ryan made. One morning, Ryan noticed something new. Lyra had drawn on one of the metal walls using a piece of coal. The shapes were rough but meaningful. Stars, planets, and strange symbols. You did this? He asked, stepping closer. She nodded. Then she pointed at one of the larger symbols, her finger trembling slightly. Home, she whispered. Ryan's chest tightened. For the first time, she had spoken about where she came from. He sat beside her. Your home, he repeated softly. Where is it now? She shook her head and drew a broken line through the stars. Her eyes filled with quiet sadness. She didn't need to say anything more. Ryan understood. Her home was gone. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He thought about how many lives had been destroyed in the war, how people like Lyra had been caught in the middle of it. He had followed orders back then, believing it was for peace. But looking at her now, he wondered how many other innocent lives had been lost because of those same orders. The next day, he decided to teach her something new. He brought out an old radio transmitter, a piece of technology he had once used in the army. This, he said, pointing at it, can talk to people far away. Lyra looked interested. He showed her how to press the button, how to tune the signal. She listened closely, her fingers light on the buttons. When a faint voice came through the static, she jumped in surprise. Ryan smiled. Don't worry, he said. It's just a signal. Nothing to be afraid of. Later, when Ryan went to rest, Lyra stayed by the radio. She turned the knob slowly, listening to faint sounds, bits of music, static, voices she couldn't understand. Yet something in those sounds made her feel less alone. Over time, she began to trust Ryan completely. She even started humming softly while working, her voice gentle like a song from another world. Sometimes Ryan would pause just to listen. It reminded him that despite everything, beauty still existed in small, quiet places. One evening, as they watched the stars, Lyra pointed upward. Many, like me, she said slowly, struggling with the words. Ryan looked at the sky and nodded. Yes, he said. There are many like you out there. Maybe someday you'll find them again. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful, and said softly, You help. Ryan smiled faintly. We help each other. That moment felt peaceful. Two different lives joined by chance, yet somehow meant to find each other. But, in the distance beyond the stars they watched, danger was already growing. Somewhere out there, people were still looking for her, the girl who had escaped the auction. They didn't know it yet, but their quiet peace was about to be tested. For now, though, under the endless sky, Ryan and Lyra sat side by side, unaware of what awaited them, simply sharing a moment of calm before the storm. And in that silence, something unspoken grew between them. Trust, understanding, and the beginning of a fragile friendship that would soon be tested in ways they could never imagine. The quiet days at the outpost didn't last forever. One afternoon, while Ryan was checking the energy cells, the communication monitor suddenly flickered to life. A message flashed across the screen, a coded signal from the central command. Ryan froze as he read it. The message said, "Subject 47 located. Retrieve immediately. Dangerous asset." His heart sank. There was no doubt who Subject 47 was. They had found Lyra. Ryan turned off the monitor quickly and looked around. Lyra was outside, feeding the small crops they had planted. The wind carried the soft hum of her voice as she hummed a tune she often sang while working. He watched her for a moment, feeling a deep ache in his chest. She didn't know she was being hunted. She didn't even know why. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He sat by the heater, thinking. Everything he had built, this fragile peace, this strange friendship, could vanish in a moment if they came for her. He remembered the warning from the auctioneer, the whispers about her being a government experiment. At the time, he hadn't believed it, but now the message confirmed it. Lyra wasn't just an alien girl. She was something the authorities wanted to erase. The next morning, he tried to act normal. Lyra noticed his silence but didn't ask questions. She had learned that humans often hid their worries behind quiet faces. When she handed him his tools, her fingers brushed against his hand. For a moment, he almost told her everything, but he stopped himself. He didn't want to frighten her, not yet. Later that day, Ryan decided to find the truth. He pulled out an old military device that still had access to classified files. With some effort, he hacked into the central records. The information he found made his blood run cold. Lyra's file said she had been captured years ago during the first contact mission. The scientists had taken her people to study their biology. Many hadn't survived. Lyra had escaped after destroying part of the lab. The government had erased the records of that operation, calling it a failed experiment. Ryan leaned back in his chair, feeling sick. He had served under that same government, believing he was fighting for peace and order. But now he saw the truth. They had treated innocent beings like objects. And Lyra was one of them. When Lyra came in later, she noticed the look on his face. "Ryan," she said softly, her words still careful. He looked up at her, unsure what to say. "They're coming," he finally said. "For you?" Her eyes widened, confusion mixed with fear. "Why?" "Because they're afraid of you," he said. "Afraid of what you are, and what you know." Lyra didn't fully understand, but she could sense the danger in his voice. She looked around the room as if seeing it for the last time. "We go?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "Yes, we leave before they find us." They worked through the night, packing supplies, food, tools, maps, and a few spare parts for the ship. The sky outside was dark, filled with silent stars. Ryan's hands shook as he prepared the engine. He hadn't run from the government before, but this time he knew there was no other choice. As dawn began to break, they took off. The outpost grew smaller behind them, disappearing into the endless desert. Lyra sat beside him, silent, her hands gripping the seat tightly. Ryan tried to smile at her. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll keep you safe." Hours later, they stopped near an abandoned mining colony to rest. The place was quiet, half buried in dust. Ryan checked the scanner. No signals nearby. For the first time since they left, he exhaled in relief. But their peace didn't last long. A few hours later, the ship's alarm blared. 3 blips appeared on the radar. Small crafts heading their way fast. "They found us," Ryan muttered. He ran to the controls, powering up the engines. "Hold on!" The ship roared to life as they lifted off again. Beams of light flashed through the clouds as the pursuers fired. Ryan twisted the controls, dodging the attacks. The ship shook violently. Lyra held onto the seat, her eyes wide with fear but also determination. When one of the enemy crafts got too close, something unexpected happened. Lyra reached out her hand toward the controls, and suddenly, the ship's systems glowed faintly. The engines surged with new power. Ryan looked at her in surprise. "What did you—" "I help," she said firmly. The ship darted through the sky faster than before, escaping the enemy's range. When they finally lost the pursuers, Ryan turned to her, amazed. "You can do that?" Lyra looked down, her expression troubled. "Energy from me," she said slowly. "They want this." Ryan realized the truth. She wasn't just a test subject. She was the key to an energy source unlike anything humans had ever known. That's why they had experimented on her kind. They landed again, this time on a quiet moon far from any known routes. Ryan stepped out first, scanning the horizon. The ground shimmered faintly under the pale light. "We'll be safe here for a while," he said. Lyra followed him, looking up at the sky filled with unfamiliar constellations. "No home," she whispered. Ryan turned to her. "Then we'll make one," he said. That night, as they sat by a small fire inside an old storage room, Ryan finally told her everything about the message, the experiments, the reason they were being chased. Lyra listened silently, her face calm but her eyes full of pain. "They hurt my people," she said softly. "All gone." Ryan nodded, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Lyra, I didn't know back then. I was part of the army that—" He stopped, unable to continue. Lyra looked at him, her gaze deep and steady. "You different," she said. "You save." He swallowed hard. "Maybe I'm just trying to make things right." She reached out and touched his hand lightly. Her fingers were cool, but her touch carried warmth. "Right," she said softly. Outside, the stars shimmered like quiet witnesses. Ryan knew the government wouldn't give up easily. They would come again, but for now they had a moment of peace. He looked at Lyra sitting beside him, the girl who had once been called wild, dangerous, untrainable. Yet here she was, gentle and strong, teaching him what it meant to care again. The firelight flickered across her face as she stared into the flames. "Ryan," she said after a long silence. "Why help me?" He took a deep breath. "Because everyone else saw a weapon," he said. "But I saw someone who deserved a chance." Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "Then we both begin again." Ryan smiled faintly. "Yes, we begin again." The wind outside whispered through the cracks of the old building. Two lost souls, hunted and tired, sat side by side. Not because they shared a past, but because they were building a future. And though danger still waited somewhere beyond the stars in that quiet moment, both of them felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The days that followed on the quiet moon felt different. Calmer, yet filled with the weight of everything that had happened. Ryan and Lyra had finally found a place where no one was chasing them, at least for now. The air was thin but breathable, and the light from the nearby planet painted the rocky ground in soft gold during the day. At night, the stars looked closer than ever, shining like a blanket of silver dust above them. Ryan worked hard to turn the old mining shelter into a real home. The building had cracked walls and broken lights, but with time and patience, it began to look alive again. Lyra helped with everything she could. Her hands, once used for defense and survival, now fixed wires, moved heavy metal panels, and even cleaned the dusty floor. She seemed to enjoy building things, creating something new out of what was once broken. It was something they both understood well. Every morning, Ryan would check the scanners to make sure no ships were near. Every time the radar showed only silence, he felt a small wave of relief. Lyra often spent those mornings walking outside, her eyes always turned toward the horizon. She would stand there quietly, feeling the soft wind brush against her face. Ryan sometimes wondered what she thought about in those moments. Her lost home, her people, or the strange new life they had made together. As time passed, Lyra began to talk more. Her words were still short and careful, but she learned fast. One morning while Ryan was cooking, she pointed to the food and said proudly, "Good smell." Ryan laughed, surprised. "You're learning too fast," he said. She tilted her head, smiling slightly. "You teach," she replied. He smiled back. It was such a simple exchange, yet it filled the small room with warmth. For someone who had lived alone for so long, Ryan found her presence changing everything. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt peaceful. One afternoon, Lyra discovered an old projector in the corner of the storage room. She pressed a few buttons, and to their surprise, it still worked. The machine showed old recordings of the miners who once lived there, humans laughing, working, and singing. Lyra watched with wide eyes, fascinated. "They happy?" she said softly. "Yes," Ryan replied. "Once they were." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. You happy now? The question caught him off guard. He thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. I think so, he said. It's been a long time since I could say that. Lyra smiled faintly, and for a moment everything felt light. But deep down, Ryan knew peace never lasted long for people like them. One evening, while he was checking the outer sensors, he noticed a weak signal nearby. Not strong enough to be a direct threat, but something was moving out there. He didn't tell Lyra right away. Instead, he strengthened the defense systems quietly and prepared the ship just in case they had to leave again. That night, as they sat by the small fire outside the shelter, Ryan finally spoke. If something happens, if they find us again, we'll run. Don't hesitate. Lyra looked at him calmly. We run together, she said. He met her gaze, then nodded. Always. Days passed without trouble, and slowly the fear began to fade again. Life took on a rhythm, fixing things, learning, cooking simple meals, and talking in short sentences that grew longer each day. Lyra started to hum while she worked, and sometimes she taught Ryan a few words in her own language. The words were soft, full of music. He tried to repeat them, often getting them wrong, which made her laugh. A small, bright laugh that always made him smile. Then one day something unexpected happened. A small ship appeared in orbit. Ryan's scanner picked it up before it landed. He tensed, ready to flee, but the signal wasn't from the government. It was from a group of refugees, a mix of humans and aliens who had escaped the same trade routes that once sold Lyra. They were weak, hungry, and desperate for shelter. Ryan looked at Lyra. If we help them, they'll know we're here, he said. It's risky. Lyra's eyes softened. They liked me before, she said quietly. We help, he sighed. He knew she was right. They couldn't turn their backs on others who had suffered the same fate. So they opened the shelter's doors and guided the refugees in. There were only a handful. Tired faces, frightened children, and wounded travelers. For the first time, the quiet outpost was full of voices. Ryan shared his food and tools while Lyra moved among the group, offering water and comfort. The refugees were cautious around her at first, but when they saw her kindness, their fear turned into gratitude. That night, Ryan watched as Lyra sat beside a small alien child who couldn't stop crying. She spoke softly in a language Ryan didn't understand, and soon the child's tears stopped. It was then Ryan realized something powerful. Lyra had become a symbol of hope, not just for him, but for others too. As days went by, the outpost became a small community. Ryan built extra shelters, and Lyra taught others how to use their natural skills to survive. People began to call the place Haven, a safe home for anyone lost between worlds. One evening, as the sky turned a deep orange, Ryan found Lyra standing on the hill where she always watched the stars. You did this, he said quietly, walking beside her. You made this place what it is. She looked at him with a calm smile. We both, she said. Together, he nodded. Together, he repeated. The wind blew gently across the valley, carrying the laughter of children and the hum of repaired machines. The once empty moon was now alive with light. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal tag, the same tag that had once hung on Lyra's cage. It was old and rusted now, but he kept it as a reminder. He looked at it for a long moment, then dropped it into the sand. Lyra watched but didn't stop him. The tag sank halfway into the ground, catching the glow of the sunset before disappearing beneath the dust. No more chains, Ryan said softly. Lyra nodded. Free, she replied. They stood side by side watching the horizon. Somewhere out there, the world was still full of war and fear. But here, in their small corner of the universe, they had built something better, something born from kindness and courage. As the night fell, Ryan lit a lantern. The soft light reflected in Lyra's bright eyes. She turned to him and said in her slow but steady voice, You saved me once. Now we save others. Ryan smiled. Yes, he said. That's what we'll do. The stars shimmered above them, countless and eternal. Around them, the laughter of the refugees echoed softly, mixing with the wind. And as the light of the lantern flickered against the night sky, it felt as if the universe itself was watching, not in judgment, but in quiet approval. The story that had begun in a dark auction house, with fear, chains, and silence, had now found its ending under the open stars. A human soldier and a once-lost alien girl had become the builders of hope, proving that compassion could survive even in the coldest corners of space. And though their journey was far from over, they knew one thing for sure: they were no longer alone.